All right, hello and welcome to the sixth episode of Talking's Not Dead. So on this episode, I invited my girlfriend on, Rebecca. She wanted to talk about Sarah J Maas, which is the author of one of her favorite fantasy series of all time, A Court of Thornes and Roses. She's also the author of A Crescent City and that series, and A Throne of Glass in that series as well. So we discuss the writing style, we discuss what she liked about it, some favorite moments, and we discuss other possible things like a TV show in the works and just her thoughts of it overall in general. Please remember, guys, that no one in these videos is an expert or has any expert advice, so please remember anything you hear in this is only opinion. Please do not take it as an expert advice or an expert opinion. All right, let's go ahead and jump into it. All right, Rebecca, thank you for coming on. So today you wanted to talk about Sarah J Maas, one of your favorite authors. So my first question, as kind of always, is why did you pick this topic? What made you want to talk about it?
I picked this topic because I need to spread the gospel, honestly.
Oh, yeah?
This Sarah J. Maas is a whole cult thing, and I need more followers. I need to spread the gospel that is Sarah J. Maas.
Well, I guess the question is, when did you join this cult? How did you discover Sarah J Maas?
It was actually it's a really funny story, because people ask me this all the time, like how I found out about it. But I was in college, as you know, I was pre-med. And one of the things that they said would be really good to study for the MCAT was to just read a lot, because you have to be able to read and comprehend really fast, because there is actually a verbal reading and writing section of the MCAT. And somebody even shared that there was like a Star Wars passage
Oh,
on one of
really?
the MCAT questions. Yeah. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to go to the bookstore and I'm going to go find something that I'm interested in reading. And I had seen this book when I walked in. It was like a big, thick book. It was
Mm-hmm.
called A Court of Silver Flames, and it was like a new release and everything. And I thought, oh, this is cool. Maybe I'll read this. This is gonna take a good chunk of my time. So I read the back, and I found that it was like the last installment of the series. So I'm like, oh, let me go find the first book of the series. So
Mm-hmm.
the first book was, as you know, Court of Thorns and Roses. Grabbed that. It was a little small for me, so I grabbed the second one after it. Thank God I did.
Mm-hmm.
I was pretty hooked
Yeah.
after, and that's basically how I stumbled upon it.
Well, that's really cool. So if I remember correctly, at this time it was very popular on social media though as well. And you discovered that popularity afterwards, right?
The book that I had found, The Court of Silver Flames, was like, as soon as I had seen it, I started seeing it all over social media. And then shortly after I had even started reading it,
Mm-hmm.
it I started seeing it everywhere, like all
Mm-hmm.
over TikTok. There's a whole TikTok dedicated to like memes about
Yeah.
this like book,
Yeah.
and like a whole fandom that I didn't even realize. And I just became part of, like I said, it's a following. It's a following.
Yes. 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 Um. So what is it about her and her writing do you think that makes her stand out from other authors?
I feel like she like I've never been much of a I mean, you, Bryce, know me very well. I'm definitely an instant gratification kind of person. I do
Mm-hmm.
not like things that I have to like take my time to like get. I want like instant gratification.
Mm-hmm.
But Sarah J. Maas made it so that I could easily like enjoy a good slow burn book.
Mm-hmm.
Like the first book, and I tell everybody this, like the first book is kind of hard to get through, honestly. Like I feel like it really lulls until like the middle end. And
Mm-hmm.
then it all of a sudden just snatches your attention.
Mm-hmm.
And then even in the second book, it's kind of a slow burn, even it's a slow burn again.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, she really just grasps my attention. I will say that I do have some critiques,
Mm-hmm.
like that I do agree that she does have a lot of like run-on sentences. There are some grammar issues that I have with her writing.
Mm-hmm.
But I am a big grammar Nazi, so there's that. So that is a critique that I do have, but I do give her a lot of slack, because I did, when I researched more about her as an author, I realized this was her very first adult fantasy series that she had actually written.
Mm-hmm. So you said that she makes it so it's easier for you to to like enjoy a slow burn? What do you think that she's doing differently from other people then to make you enjoy that? Like, what is the thing that's different?
The thing that's different, and I mean, it might just be me. I
Mm-hmm.
can't speak for everybody, but for me, I feel like there are things in books that, like Easter eggs. I feel like there are Easter eggs in certain books that you don't get right away. You have to like read them a second time.
Mm-hmm.
In this book, there were Easter eggs that like I was able to like recollect.
Mm.
Like I could be in the second book and something could be mentioned that was already like very subtly hinted in the first book. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh my God. Like
Yeah.
it was easy to remember that because she had made it like a subtly profound moment, but not so subtly.
Okay.
So I think her Easter eggs are really good. She makes it easy for the reader to understand those Easter eggs and draw back to them.
Okay. That's actually something I would not have thought of. It's definitely a very unique skill, I think, in an author, for sure.
Mhm. I do too. I feel like I almost think of like Taylor Swift, which is another love of mine, as you
Right,
know.
right.
So it's like Taylor Swift very subtly hints at her Easter eggs in her songs. So I think of Sarah J. Maas as the Taylor Swifts of artists, of authors.
Okay. That's high praise.
That is high praise.
Um well, so okay, so another thing that I've heard you praise about her is her world building. They're all through the various different novels that you read from her. So, what do you think makes her world building so good, and what's unique about it?
So again, I will say there is some controversy on this because some people will say I have heard people say her world building in A Court of Thorns and Roses is not that great. I think it was amazing, especially for somebody like me who's, new to this fantasy world. Because like I would say that I didn't read high fantasy before
Mhm.
I read her. Like it was like people who have read like high fantasy, I feel like know what I'm talking about. But um her world building I felt like was easy for somebody new like me to understand and really appreciate. Um because when I got to her other series, Crescent City, I was like, "Oh my god, this is the most complex like world building I have ever read." It took
Mhm.
me I'm a pretty fast reader, as you know. Like
Mhm.
I got through the second book, which I think was, I don't know, was it like 500 pages?
The second book of Corthon's Roses.
Yeah. I think
That
it was
was
like
like 600 pages.
600 pages. I read that in like 3 days.
Mhm.
And her her first book of Crescent City it was like a couple hundred more. It was like I would say it was about 800
Mhm.
pages, which is pretty big, but for
Right.
me, I feel like I'm somebody who could get through that pretty easily.
Right.
Um, but it took me a very long time to read that book because I had to digest like the world, the type of people, like their
Mhm.
whole um like she created a whole universe. It
Mhm.
was more than just a world, it was she's completely built this whole universe and
Mhm.
multiverse.
Mhm.
If you go into her other series, it's insane. And I think her world building in um A Court of Thorns and Roses was just really well done in a way that it was good for beginners.
Mhm.
That way, when you go into her other books, you're able to understand the higher complexities that go
Mhm.
into world building. Like, she basically created like in A Court of Thorns and Roses, it's kind of just like maybe a continent that you think of that
Mhm.
has like the spring court, the night court,
Right.
the autumn court, just different courts in this one land.
Mhm.
But in like Crescent City, it's a whole world. It's like a city like that's maybe even bigger than New York
Mhm.
that has like different sections, and there's different parts of the world that people are going off to have like a war in,
Mhm.
different like species of creatures
Mhm.
um that have their own kind of like even like religion and social views on
Mhm.
how things are um governed in this world.
Mhm.
So it is very interesting.
So, when you say that, you're talking about Crescent City, let's talk about that for just a second. Is it the complexity of the world building that you like, or is there another aspect specifically of the world building that you think like really kind of captured you? For Crescent City, let's talk about.
Crescent City, I think it really was the world building, which is very interesting for me because, like I said, I've never read a book like it. I've never, I feel like I'm not somebody who usually would appreciate things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I really did because you are reading it and you're kind of thinking, wow, this person, like this singular author,
Mm-hmm.
created like this whole world with all these names, all these like things of these people, even their like physiology
Mm-hmm.
of all these different creatures.
Right.
Like she basically created like even her own government for this
Mm-hmm.
city. I really appreciate because that's a lot of work. It's just I don't know, it makes you like, wow, this is very you can really appreciate it.
So is it more?
Um
So maybe more the wholeness of the package. Then it seems like there's no stone unturned in terms of what she's thought of for this world. There's no
I think
question you could ask that she doesn't have an answer for.
exactly. There really isn't. In the beginning, you come at it with all these questions, but it she digests it in a very stepwise almost manner, which makes it feel very slow. But once you get it, it's like all encapsulating. You're kind of just flowing with the characters that are in it
Mm-hmm.
and their chemistry, and it's it's a ride.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. So, we talked a little bit about her strengths. What do you think some of her weaknesses are? You already kind of touched on grammar and stuff, but are there any other writing weaknesses you think that she has?
Well, funny you should ask that. Because it was actually you, Bryce, who said to me, you were like, I don't think she writes men really well.
I
And
did say that.
that was a hot take for me, honestly. But you know
Yeah.
what? As you know, I read the series once and I
Mm-hmm.
spread the gospel to you and
Yes.
my best friend Natalie, and you guys were reading it. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to read it too. I'm going to reread it and like kind of come at the perspective of some of yours and Natalie's critiques. So when I read it a second time, I think it was able to like have a little more criticism. Um, and even with Crescent City, I do have some criticism, which is I do think her writing is a little bit better in
Mm-hmm.
Crescent City. But I think you were right. I think she doesn't completely write men well,
Mm.
especially in A Court of Thorns and Roses.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like one of the main characters, one of the main characters in the book, um, like Tamlin,
Right.
I don't think he was very well written. I think he could have been a little bit better. I do think she was a little harsh on that character, but I still stand by her decision. It just was very I could definitely see it be abrupt as it was.
Mm-hmm.
I think she could have made it a little smoother.
Okay, so is it more the transition then from and again, for those of it to be a little bit less vague, we're talking. It sounds like you're talking about in the first book where you kind of went from the love interest to no longer the love interest at the end of the first book, beginning of the second book.
Yeah.
So, do you think that was just the abruptness of that? Do you think she could have like foreshadowed that more, or like what do you think was the part that
Oh,
wasn't well written?
totally. I think she could have totally foreshadowed it. Although I will say, like, it's so funny because it's like I'm doing this with you, and I don't want to like give it away in case other people want to read it.
There's
But
a spoiler warning ahead, so
there's a
just be
spoiler
aware. Just be
warning.
aware.
Okay,
We're
cool.
spoiling the entire
Um,
thing.
okay. So, like, I almost wonder if it was a creative choice for her to make the audience fall in love with Tamlin
Mm-hmm.
because Feyre did too, but Feyre was also really naive.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm talking about the main character,
Yes.
as you know. Sorry, I should have like led with that, but I'm almost wondering if that was a creative decision on her part to make the audience like the main character Feyre to fall in love with Tamlin
Mm-hmm.
and not see the red flags. Like she didn't see any of the red flags.
Mm-hmm.
I'm almost wondering if that was that decision because then she just flipped the script in the second book and was like, "No, you guys have some issues just like Favorite does."
Interesting. I never thought of it like that, and I definitely could see an author, going with that route. Even if it was that decision, I don't know if it worked for me, but just because it doesn't work for me doesn't mean it's not a good decision in the long run. So that's interesting. Any other weaknesses that you can think of, or is that like the main one that comes to mind?
That's really like the main one that comes to mind. I will say like I've only read like this one series and um I read Crescent City, which only has like two books, and I haven't read her young adult series, which everybody keeps raving about. I'm in the middle of reading her young adult series,
Well,
and it's pretty good so far.
it's actually a great segue into my next question. So I know that you've started reading A Throne of Glass. Now I'm not going to ask you too much about that because I know that you're like halfway through the first book. But um, as you've gone back to her first book, have you noticed any differences from her writing style then versus now?
Oh yeah,
Like, what have you
I can.
noticed?
It's so weird. It's like I'm reading this book, and I do know it was her first ever series that she wrote was A Throne of Glass, and not only was it her first series that she wrote, it's a young adult series.
She
So
started it when she was 16.
yeah, really young.
Hmm.
So her stylistic choices and her inner monologues of the characters are a little. I can definitely see a teenager writing this.
Oh, okay.
And that's not to say it's bad. It's just very
Noticeable.
young.
Mm.
Yeah, it's very young type of thinking. There are some word choices that, I mean, I don't know. She's very, what's the word? Eloquent with her wording in Crescent
Mm.
City.
Hmm.
It's like she became a really nice adult writer
I
in
see.
Crescent City. She was like transitioning through A Court of Thorns and Roses, and she was very, I don't know. I guess it does read a little amateurish, but
Okay, interesting.
yeah,
But I mean that makes sense because that was again first outing kind of thing.
yeah.
Especially because I actually don't know if you know this that she actually had this written and she posted it on a website on like one of those like book websites where you just post your own thing for a while before she published it.
I actually did not know that. That is
So
very interesting.
so yeah, there's an original draft of a Throne of Glass that exists that was on the internet before she retracted it and made a book out of it.
Okay. That is very interesting. I didn't know that. But that again like makes sense because
Hmm.
it does read like, yeah, it reads like that.
That's
And again,
fair.
that's not to say it's bad. It is good, but it's definitely like, okay, my younger high school self would like this a lot more.
That's fair. And just because you're not target audience doesn't mean that it's necessarily a bad thing. It's going for a specific goal. And obviously,
Yeah.
you'll tell me what you think when you finish the series because it could change.
What I find really interesting, which is why I decided to read this because I wasn't going to read this series.
Hmm.
I had like no intention of ever reading it. Was She wrote this way back then,
Hmm.
but she has Easter eggs in that book that have even been in her most recent adult series.
Hmm.
So she must have had this planned out for a while.
Or she's
And
good at backtracking because sometimes that's how these Easter eggs work out too. It's not always necessarily that was planned, but it's that because of the way that you write things, it's easy to tie back to and kind of
oh,
like,
maybe.
you know what I mean?
Yeah. Hmm.
Especially as someone who DMs a lot. I mean, trust me, I've gotten at least decent at doing that where I'm like, I said this thing, I'm going to make that relevant now.
Yeah, for sure.
So, I was curious. Do you have any favorite moments or favorite moment or moments from the books you've read of hers? Anything that stands out to you as a you could pick a few, you could pick one. What do you think?
Okay. Um, I have quite a bit, but I think I definitely can narrow it down to, like, are we talking throughout all of her books or just like A Court of Thorns and
All of
Roses
her books.
specifically?
All of her
All of
books.
her books?
A
Well, it's hard.
handful.
I don't want to even tell you because you haven't read Crescent City yet. Um,
That's up to you.
but okay. I'll give you my top for The Court of Thorns and Roses, and I'm sorry if I'm spoiling this for anybody who definitely wants to read the book, but
Read the book
maybe this
now.
will read the book now. Maybe this will intrigue you. I think my most favorite moment. Everybody loves chapter 55, which is when
In the second book.
and I'm talking chapter 55 of A Court of Mist and
The second book.
Fury, which is the second book. And that's when, the two love interests, Feyre and Rhysand, they finally get together. They finally get together. And it is chef's kiss. It's beautiful.
It's
It's so
beautiful.
beautiful. It's beautiful. But honestly, my most favorite is when Feyre has to pretend that she has to go along with Rhysand's act when they go under the mountain back to the
Mm.
night court,
Mm-hmm.
and she has to like dressed up, and they have this like very domineering act. I mean, you can see it's like my Discord
Right.
profile
Right.
pic. But it is nice. It is nice. It is a nice moment.
Okay. Anything from Crescent City you want to share? You can be vague if you want. People that have read it, they can tell.
So in Crescent City, the main character's name is Bryce, as you know.
My
And it's a
my book.
girl. It's a girl, Bryce Quinlan. She has a no fucks given attitude. Sorry, wait, was I allowed to even say that?
Yeah, you can cuss.
Okay, cool. I didn't know if it had to be like bleeped out or anything.
No,
Um,
no. This is the internet,
so
baby. Wild
okay.
West. I ain't making money on this
So
anyway.
she is like a no fucks given kind of lady. She does her own thing. She takes what she wants, and she is like cut and dry. I think all of her moments with Hunt, this he's kind of like a detective
Mm-hmm.
that she has to work with. He's called something else, but he's basically like a detective.
Sure.
And the way she like taunts him is like hilarious. There are so many funny moments.
Yeah.
And I think one of my favorite moments is when they're like it's like her brother, this dude, and like her brother's best friend. They're all sitting on this couch and they're all different magical beings.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just on a modern day laptop, like researching things.
Oh
And
yeah.
it's a really good moment. Yeah.
That's cool.
It's really funny. Yeah.
All right. If I were to move on here, I guess I have a couple more questions kind of on this vague line, and then we're gonna go ahead and switch gears a little bit. Um, so I was curious, if you had to change one thing in ACOTAR as the entire series, what would you change? What would your one change be? If you had the power to change one thing, what would you want to change?
I would change the fact that I would definitely change, and this is like way later in the series, but I
Right.
would definitely not have made Lucian Elaine's mate.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think that was a really poor choice because she really kind of and maybe this is another criticism, but you know, I feel like I should almost explain to the audience what this means, but I don't want to take too long. Basically like this character from the Spring Court, Lucian, um
Who
like
was a Toodle
sees
bro. One of my favorite characters in the
yeah,
first book. Loved
he's
that
a
man.
homeboy. Lucian's a homeboy.
My biggest
He
sadness with the series was what they did to my boy. He
I
was a
know. It
he was a
is.
homeboy, dude.
He was. But you know, Elena's favorite sister, the main character, she
Yeah.
goes into this cauldron and it makes her a fae
Mm-hmm.
because before she's human.
Mm-hmm.
And so when she comes out of the cauldron, she's fae and she's forced in the cauldron against her will. She comes out, Lucian is there, and he sees her and suddenly they're like mates
Yeah.
because that's what the fae have with each other. So they're mates and Sarah J. Maas is like, I don't know what she was thinking because it's like that was it. Elaine doesn't fall in love with Lucian like he falls in love with her as his mate. She's really quiet. She's kind of like depressed. We kind of don't know what the fuck is going on
And
with
this
her.
happened like pretty early in book 3, right?
This happened wait, yeah. It happened it happened early on in book 3 because it happened at the very end of the second book.
Oh yeah, the end of the second book was that. So I guess it was technically the end of the second book was when she turned Fae, right?
Yeah, it was the very, very end.
Yeah. So
And
like,
then
oh sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go for it.
no, you're good. You're good.
I was just gonna say I feel like it hasn't gone anywhere since I guess so the end of the second book to the third book, fourth book, fifth book. It has not gone anywhere.
Exactly. And so that says a lot. And it's kind of sad because you can see that Lucian is really trying, but
Yeah.
Elaine is like completely dead to the world. She's very somnolent
Yeah.
and flat affect, like, and then suddenly Sarah J. Maas just stops talking about them.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's very like weird how that happened.
Do you think she's gonna pay it off in some way in a future novel? Do you think that that's like something that she has in the works, or do you think it's gonna get dropped? Like kind of maybe
So
not drop, but you know what I mean, kind of like pushed to the side. Something else is gonna happen.
I'm hoping so. So like there are some like ideas floating out there on TikTok that Lucian is really not Elaine's mate.
Mm-hmm.
That she's Tamlin's mate, and Tamlin is again the main character of the first book, the first love interest,
Mm.
the dude that ends up being not that great.
Mm-hmm.
And Lucian and Tamlin are best friends in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, they're not best friends anymore, but you know, he still holds a certain Lucian still holds a certain torch for Tamlin because they grew up together and Tamlin
Mm-hmm.
like really helped him, and that's talked about. But there are some ideas that Elaine is really Tamlin's mate since Tamlin was there also when she came out of the cauldron, and Lucian is just hiding it because that would be so painful for Feyre to find out.
Mm.
It would be painful for Tamlin too, since there's like that conflict between
Mm.
them, lots of drama. Um, and then some people are like, because it's been hinted in the third book that you can reject a mating bond, like
Yeah.
that can happen. And then you see Asriel becoming, and Asriel is one of the friends of Feyre that she becomes friends with. And
Mm-hmm.
people are thinking, well, what if she does reject the mating bond and her and Asriel get together?
Mm-hmm.
Because her and Asriel become pretty close,
Yeah.
like, especially in the fourth book.
I think narratively, I think that makes more sense than the first option, just because I think the books have faced a lot of emphasis on the mating bond, and I think it'd be very interesting if you took that down its natural progression of like, what do you do if a character rejects it? You know what I mean? Like, how do they move on? Like, how does that affect them? And can you find like real love if you reject a mating bond in this world where mating is a real thing, like soul mating?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so it'll be really interesting too, because the A Court of Silver Flames, which I finally got to, was of course like would you call it a spinoff?
It's I don't know if the spinoff is the correct term. It's close to a spinoff. Like it's the same characters, but it's like new, different main character, different perspective, same setting, but it still is continuing. So I don't know. Probably a spinoff is the closest term. Is it like anthology series or something like that? I don't even know what that.
No, an anthology is like different, but I mean, yeah. So it's basically like a continuation, maybe from a different character's perspective that's focused on the other character, which in this case is Feyre's other sister, Nesta.
Mm-hmm.
So Sarah J. Maas has decided to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And she has decided that she's subtly hinted that there will be another A Court of Thorns and Roses book.
Mm-hmm.
And some people are thinking that that will be from Elaine or Asriel's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So, who knows? But instead of coming out with that book, she came out with the third Crescent City book, which has a lot to do with A Court of Thorns and Roses.
Which we're gonna come to in a well, we can come to that in a little bit. Maybe not spoiler week, but I had some questions about that. So I have one more question before we kind of switch gears here, and I am gonna force you to answer this question. If I forced you to pick, which would you say is your favorite book of hers that you've read? I forced you.
If you force me,
If I forced you to pick one.
my favorite,
Your favorite.
this is going to be so shocking to you.
It is. I'm ready.
It is definitely Crescent City, A House of Sky and Breath, the second book.
Really?
Yeah.
The one that took you so long to finish. Why is that?
That second book literally opened the floodgates to the multiverse that Sarah J. Maas is about to reveal in this third book. This third book that she's coming out with, I think in January of 2024, is gonna be insane because of that second book. It literally dropped like I swear to God, the world's biggest fucking, what do you call it? Cliffhanger. Cliffhanger, bombshell. Like I was screaming. It is so good. And I will say, the reason it took me so long was it was very, like, those books are really dense. That's almost 1,000-word book.
Yeah.
It's really dense. It has a lot of politics, inner politics of that book.
Well, so you're mentioning the multiverse. So actually, I have a question later, but I'll jump into it right now. So Sarah J. Maas has created a multiverse with her 3 main novel series, right? All 3 of them are interconnected now. In some way. I've not read Crescent City. I know that you're being big on that on my behalf. So do you think that was a good move on her part? And do you think that more authors would benefit from doing something like this? Or do you think there's something special about her series that lends itself to a multiverse like this?
I think there's something very special about this. Like, I feel like if it were anybody else trying to do this, I don't think it would go down well.
Mm,
She did this very carefully, very methodically. Like, it is definitely not shoved in your face. You
mm,
do not even think of these things. Like, you can kind of see some things that link in with those books.
mhm.
But, like, I think I even told you, like, I actually kind of spoiled the second book for myself
I know that you read the ending, like you were
because I
halfway
read the
through,
ending.
and then you're like, I need to know what happens. Like, oh my god, you were freaking out.
Yeah, so I read, like, the last sentence of the book, and I just can't. I can't. And I was like, "No way." And so um when I went back and reread A Court of Thrones, I was seeing things for the first time too. Like, I was highlighting certain
Right,
things and was like, "Oh my god, this makes so much sense."
right,
And I'm literally like flipping between books and like
right.
highlighting certain things, and I'm like,
Recontextualizing stuff.
yeah. I even have like notes written down on it.
Oh
Like,
yeah,
yeah,
that's hardcore.
yeah.
That's dedication to your cult.
It is because I'm trying to like tie in things that
Yeah.
she's literally put out there to lead to this.
Do you think it's gonna work out? Do you think that the next book's gonna stick the landing?
I really hope so. It would be such a shame that I honestly like this next book that she's going to come out with. She's either going to do a really good job or it's going to be a complete letdown. It
Mm.
can go either two ways.
And
But
that comes out at
if
the end of the
you,
year, right?
yeah, I have faith in Sarah J. Maas. I think she'll I think she'll do us good. I think she'll do her fans good.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Okay, so I want to switch gears a little bit here. So I know there's a possible Hulu TV show in the works for Court of Thornes and Roses. Are you excited about that?
I am, but I'm not. I don't know if you ever like saw or read City of Bones.
Mm-mm.
Okay, so that was a really good series that I read when I was younger. It was a really good young adult series.
Mm-hmm.
Had with Fallen Angels. It was really good. Um, they made a TV show out of it on Freeform, and it sucked.
Oh
It
yeah.
sucked so bad. And it honestly just ruined the whole book. It really did ruin the whole book for me. They even tried making a movie out of it too. The movie I think was even better than the TV show, but the
Yeah.
movie still sucked.
Yeah.
Um, but I am scared because Hulu hasn't made many good shows.
Okay.
Honestly, this would be really cool. I think Sarah J. Maas deserves Game of Thrones energy like HBO.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That would be cool.
that would be cool. So I mean, it could be good. I mean, the what is it? The Handmaid's Tale, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen a couple episodes of that. That one's really good. So there it could Hulu could do it justice, and that could be, Hulu's crowning jewel. But
Do you think that Crescent City lends itself better to a TV show than A Court of Thorns and Roses? If you're looking for that Game of Thrones style, a lot of the ways that you describe Crescent City sounds kind of like that complex, political, character driven world building. It sounds like that's almost like a Game of Thrones esque HBO show waiting to happen.
that would be really cool. The only problem with it as a show, I mean, it could because it could be like a J.R.R. Martin kind of thing because she's not finished with it.
Yeah.
But it could easily become like that where, she never finishes it, but
Yeah,
the
you
show
don't have to have
continues
it.
on.
You don't have to have it
Yeah.
finished for them to.
It could be. I will say it would be interesting to see. I think it would make a better movie than a
Oh,
show.
interesting.
Because there's a lot like that book, if you just took away all the work, all of her like content, like if you I feel like that book could be really shortened on screen
Interesting. Okay.
because you would be visualizing the world, you would be
Oh, okay.
visualizing the politics. It's easy to write a lot of words of the minutia involved, but condensing it down, I feel like it would actually make a better movie than a TV
Interesting.
show.
Oh, okay. I would not have thought that.
Hmm.
So I read that Sarah J. Maas is working with the production of the show. I've heard that she's working. I don't know if really closely is the word, but at least she's pretty close working with it. How important do you think it is for a show or a movie based on a book to involve the original author for it to be successful?
I think it's super important. Like if you take Harry Potter for example, that's probably like arguably one of the only like movies that has been really well adapted from the books.
Mm-hmm.
And J.K. Rowling was immensely involved.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I never read a Game of Thrones, but I know some people that did, and I mean that was a pretty good show. I mean, up until the end, but
Up
as
until it
we know
wasn't.
that up until it wasn't, but you know, that was like going off script. Like I think the book, correct me if I'm wrong, but Game of Thrones, the books end when Jon Snow like almost dies, right? And then he comes back to life.
So actually, the last, if I'm remembering this correctly, I could get this wrong, but I'm pretty sure there's 5 books that are currently published. The 5th book ends with Jon Snow dying.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I believe the way that we know that he comes back is because I believe George R. R. Martin, at some point between the last like 12 years since he's not published a book, he did release some excerpts from the 6th book that he'd written, and that was Jon Snow coming back to life. So like the reason we know that that's what's supposed to happen is because George R. R. Martin released that, but that would technically be in the 6th book, I believe. The 5th book ended on a cliffhanger where Jon Snow died, and that's where people were for a long time.
Exactly. So like, and you could definitely, and that was in the show too. So I mean, the show was really really good up until it wasn't. But then again, like he stopped writing.
Mm-hmm.
So I to answer your question, like yeah, I think an author's involvement in a movie or show production is extremely important. Because without that, it's like, you know, they're not gonna fully grasp the world that is that story that that author created.
Yeah. Does that give you a little bit more hope for the Hulu series, or are you still just not
It
sure?
does. No, it does give me hope because I don't think Sarah J. Maas would let it be the way that it I don't I would like to think that she would not let it be cheesy or
Mm-hmm.
cringy or childish. It
Part of
is an adult
mm-hmm.
book.
Mm-hmm.
It should be an adult TV show.
Part of me wonders if that's why it seems like it's taking so long, is because I wonder if she's trying to make sure that they get it right.
I've thought of that too. I did see on Instagram once that her husband apparently I think is also very involved in it.
Oh,
Like I
really?
don't know if he's in production or something, but there's like a clip about with him and a screenplay
Mm-hmm.
of it. And that was like a really big deal in the Sarah J. Maas community, was actually getting to see the script of part of the script.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I would not have thought of that. So I have some specific ACOTAR questions about like the story I was curious about. I know this is one we've talked about, so I want to get your opinion live now. Do you think that Tamlin deserves all of the hate he gets throughout the series and from the reaction from the readers?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it could have been done a little more subtly, but he really screws over Feyre.
Mm-hmm.
Like he he really is the definition of a gaslighting, misogynistic asshole
Mm-hmm.
in the second book. And I get that he has his own trauma, but so does Feyre. And
Mm-hmm.
he's not even trying.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that can be, you know, that's up to the other people reading it. That's up to their interpretation. For me, I don't care. That was fucked up.
Yeah.
You know, he literally locks her in against her will. She's
Right.
like she's panicking because she thinks she's under the mountain. She has PTSD from
Mm-hmm.
what happened, and he is just making it 10 times worse. Like she's like wasting away basically, and he doesn't
Mm-hmm.
even care.
Right.
And he's, you know, misogynistic and saying, "Oh, you can never be a high lady." And for the
Mm-hmm.
audience out there, you know, high lady is like being like a lord or a lady of
Mm-hmm.
like a court. So there
Right.
you go. But she can never be that.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
To him, at least.
to him at least, because then comes Rhysand and he what I like about their relationship is that he doesn't do this just for love. He does it out of respect for her as a person. I was
Mm-hmm.
almost going to say human being, but they're not human.
Not anymore.
Yeah. So he respects her as a person first.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's what every woman wants to hear. So that's like and that's why maybe like you might have a different opinion than me, but honestly, I feel like women want to be respected first
Mm-hmm.
and as a person.
Yeah.
before they can like be loved by another person. And so I I do think he deserves the hate because of course, then again, when she leaves, Tamlin doesn't understand that no means no.
Right.
And not only tries to get her back, but is like, let me bring your sisters to the fairy world and let me give them to the fucking bad guy
Yeah.
in order for you to come back to me. Oh,
Right.
and while I'm at it, they're gonna make them Fae and possibly kill them.
You didn't know about that, but still,
But this is
yes.
because I love you.
This is because I love you.
So yeah, I think he deserves quite a bit of hate.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I have a follow-up question. Now, this is a weird question, so I want to try and explain this as much as possible because I was actually thinking about this very recently. So, in the first book, um, Tamlin is the main love interest, and we have Rhys, who is a villain. He's the villain of the story in many aspects.
Mm-hmm.
There is the end part where they kind of work together, but the way that the book kind of portrays it, he's still seen as like the villain, right? Now that all gets recontextualized in later books, but let's just say that we stick with the first book, right? We stick with that. Now there are some things that Tamlin does that are a bit weird, a bit sketchy. Now, what I'm curious about is your opinion. Say that the books had been written, the rest of the books had been written, so that Tamlin was still the love interest and Rhys was still the villain, right? Do you think that audiences would have noticed Tamlin's bad traits? Not necessarily whether or not they're there or not. Let's just say that Tamlin's still Tamlin. But do you think that people would have noticed them if he never became no longer the love interest? Do you think they would have eventually seen the red flags, or do you think it always is like they needed to see it through Feyre's eyes?
That's a really interesting question. And honestly, I think that depends on, I'm trying to find the right word. I think that really depends on who you are as a person,
Mm-hmm.
because as we know in real life, people choose to ignore red flags all the time.
Mm-hmm.
People don't see red flags. They just go about their lives. We're not all completely well-adjusted people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think some people could totally go with it and be like, "Oh my god, no. He's amazing.
Yeah.
Like he is like my book boyfriend."
Yeah.
And but that's them. They clearly don't see red flags.
Mm-hmm.
And even me, like I fell in love with Tamlin. I was like, "Oh my god, I love this man."
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, "No, honey." And I was like, "Oh my god."
Mm-hmm.
So, no, like I think it's easy. It depends. I would say that it depends on the kind of person, because it just depends on how well adjusted you are.
Okay. It's possible, but not necessarily like certain.
Yeah. Like Natalie, I think Natalie, no, no, not Natalie, but one of my coworkers, I think it was Huma, at work. She was like, um, I think she agreed that she didn't like, she saw Tamlin red flags from the get-go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's fair. So for another aspect of the book series, what are your thoughts on the final battle at the end of book 3?
The final oh yeah. That we did talk about that. 'Cause yeah, I
Yes.
did reread it, and yeah. Um, when I first read it, I thought it was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
The second time I read it, I was a little sad.
Yeah.
It was a lot shorter than I had initially thought it was. It was good. I mean, I know you have a different opinion, which you bring a very valid argument, because I know this is like being very vague right now, but
I can
um
say what I think if you want me to. Would that
yeah,
help
say what
or?
you think, and then say what you
Yeah,
think, and then I'll give you my thing.
so basically when I was reading the book, because I really did like the series, but I think that the ending of book 3 is definitely a weak point for me. Mostly because the ending fight is pretty short. It's only 100 pages of this like 700, 800 page book. Like it's a gigantic book. And there's like just all this lead up, but then the main character, Feyre, she has all this power. She's been learning how to control it. And then she doesn't really do anything with her powers in the final battle. And she doesn't do anything in the final battle really at all. There are like other people that fight the final battle. It's like Reese isn't even really like that big of a deal in the final battle. It's like Cassian and Nesta who are like a big deal in the final battle, which is kind of cool. But they've really been like kind of like background characters for a lot of the series, and it just felt like it wasn't as epic and like the culmination of what has been happening as it should have been. It felt like some of the things that happened were just kind of random. And then I always feel like I mispronounced her name. Is it Amryn? Is that right? Amryn? Amryn? Amryn?
I think it's Amryn.
Amryn?
I think it's Amryn.
Like, and then Amryn just kind of comes in and just kind of cleans up, you know what I mean? And then the worst part for me was that she sacrificed herself to clean up, and then she came back anyway like nothing had happened. She lost her powers, but I was like, come on, there's gotta be some sacrifice here, you know what I mean? I hate it when authors don't have the balls to commit to their sacrifices. So that's kind of I would say my issues with the ending.
So this is my take on it. After reading it a second time, I could totally see that, because I think I was more focused on, I wanted to like focus, when you had told me that, I was like, I'm going to reread this and focus a little more closely on like Feyre.
Mm-hmm.
And during that book, there are some small battles. Like there are these small, like, they're because I think they're trying to find the book for the cauldron.
Mm-hmm.
And or pieces of the book.
Mm-hmm.
Or was it and every time they go, they encounter some kind of problem, and Feyre has to use one of her gifts. Like in one instance, she had to control water. In another instance, there was like an ambush and she had to control, I think it was like either fire or wind. One time she had to like control ice. Like she has all these powers and she uses them. And you're right, at the very end and at one point she uses all of them at once, which is really cool. And you would think that would be like, that's what's going to lead her to the battle. But do you remember in the third book when her and Azriel were talking, because in one instance she can shapeshift and grow wings and she wants to learn how to fly.
Yes.
Because, content warning, they all can fly. And Feyre's gifts came from all these high lords of the court.
Right.
So the fact that she can grow wings is from like Rhysand's Night Court powers, because he's Valerian, part Valerian.
I always thought that was because of Tamlin shapeshifting that she could do that.
It's both, I think, because she can shapeshift, but she doesn't shapeshift to a wolf like Tamlin.
I think Tamlin can technically shapeshift into anything. I think he just chooses the wolf, isn't that right?
I didn't think so, but I might have to like look back at that. I thought he was only able to transform into
I might have misunderstood, but I thought he could transform into anything. I think he just always did the wolf because that was like his natural state or whatever. But anyway.
But anyways, so she wants to learn how to fly, and Azriel, has this like heart to heart with her because she's really down on herself. She wants to be able to fly, to like be good in battle, which might be in the air. And he was saying how they're like thousands of years ago, because they're immortal. There was this really big war, and there was this human named Jurian. I can't pronounce his name. I think it's Jurian. And he was in charge of like the human lands, and then there was these two other people that I can't even remember their names right now, but they were like Fae.
Yeah.
And the girl was like, she had like been speared or something awful had happened to her. And this other Valerian who had like problems with her wings, she couldn't fly, but she managed to basically save her from death and flew her. So even when the impossible seemed impossible, she made it possible.
Right.
That was like this motivating story that Azriel told Feyre.
Right.
Like in your weakest of moments, or like in your most powerful moments, the weakest person can be like the most powerful and can be the one that makes or breaks like a battle, stuff like that.
Right.
And I almost wonder if that message, even though it was meant for Feyre, was supposed to be like an empowering moment for these other background characters. Like maybe that was like their shining moment. Like, yes, these characters seem really unimportant to us, but here, I'm going to show you why they are important, because they're going to be the ones that save the day.
Yeah.
While Feyre and Rhysand take a back seat. Now, that's a stylistic choice of Sarah J Maas. I'm not saying it's the best one, but that could have been why she did that.
Sure.
Because of that. And but my opinion on it is kind of mixed. I think it was I do agree with what you say, which is yeah, it was very short,
Mm-hmm.
but I do think it was kind of cool seeing these other characters besides Feyre and Rhysand save the day, because we had already been seeing them like kicking ass and taking names in all these other mini battles throughout the book.
My only problem with that point of view is that then they got their own book.
Oh yeah,
It's
like
like
Cassian and Nesta.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's like why give them the end of Feyre's not of trilogy if they're gonna get their own book? I don't know. But I see what you're saying though. I think that definitely could be a stylistic choice, and it could definitely kind of like tie into the themes if that's definitely what she was going for. I just don't know if it worked for me necessarily.
yeah, and I mean that's a good point but I will say like even in their own book, their battle is more personal. It's more personal to the both
Definitely.
of them.
Mm-hmm.
Like that has nothing to do with the Feyre and Rhysand.
Yeah,
Like that's definitely a more personal battle.
definitely. Okay. I only got a few more questions for you. So do you think that the magic of ACOTAR will diminish if Sarah J. Maas keeps making books in the series from other characters' perspectives? Like, do you think if she continues this on for too long, that the series will lose its magic?
I think it can. I don't think she'll go on for too much longer. Like some people are saying that this next book will probably be from Elaine's perspective. It's more likely that like we'd like it to be from well, I mean it could be from both. It could be Elaine and Azriel
Mm-hmm.
because in the Court of Silver Flames it's both Nesta and Cassian. But
Mm-hmm.
I think she's gonna do like the three sisters. There's Feyre, that was her series. You know,
Mm-hmm.
Nesta's gonna have her own book. Elaine's gonna have her own book. I think she's gonna end it there.
You think it's gonna be it?
Um, I think that's gonna be it for Court of Thorns and Roses. But again, like I said, she's twisted this into this other world,
Mm-hmm.
and if it goes the way if if she twists it into this other world, it could go a lot longer. But it
Mm-hmm.
won't be just a Court of Thorns and Roses anymore in that world. It'll be like a mix of characters in a different
It'll
world.
be like a new story. Like all three of them will come kind of streamline into a new series or story almost.
Yeah.
Even if it's not
Yeah.
called a new series, it'll be like its own thing.
Yeah. This might be giving it way too much high praise, but I feel like it's going to be like Marvel where there are going to be different arcs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Phase 1 is done. Phase 2 is starting.
Phase 1 and 2 are done. We're
Phase
going
3.
into phase 3
Going into
now.
Endgame now.
Yeah, this is like Endgame, yeah.
There you go.
Maybe. We'll see.
So actually, so I did very brief research, but when I was looking, actually, so I don't know anything about Throne of Glass. I haven't really learned too much about it, but I actually found out it was inspired by Cinderella. It was actually one of the main inspirations.
That makes sense. I could see that so far.
And I know that A Court of Thorns and Roses was inspired by Beauty and the Beast. So my question to you was, do you see any like Disney or fairy tale influences in Crescent City?
No.
No.
I mean, maybe it's completely, maybe I'm not seeing it,
Yeah.
but to me, no way.
No.
It
Okay.
reads more like, I don't know. It's very interesting. It reads like the first Crescent City book reads like a detective novel almost,
Interesting.
except
Okay.
it's fantasy.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's definitely a different style for her.
It is. It's interesting.
So, I was actually thinking back to the conversation that I had with Sydney. And I asked her a question that I thought would actually be very interesting to ask you here because it kind of works with what we're talking about. So, I know that you've watched that podcast, so I wanted to ask you the question. What do you think are some necessary attributes for a good fantasy novel? What do you think is required to make a good fantasy novel, in your opinion?
That's hard because this is the only fantasy series I've ever really read.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I've read Lord of the Rings, but
Right.
I mean,
The fantasy series, even.
that's nobody reads that book for fun. I don't think. I think I didn't read it for fun. I did not like it.
That's a take, I think. I think that might be a take.
It could be a hot take because I did not read that for fun. The Hobbit was good, but honestly, like Tolkien will literally go on like a fucking whole chapter describing a tree. Like, maybe that's exaggerating, but I swear to God, it's like three
A man
whole
liked
pages.
trees, okay?
He's like, I think it's 3 whole
He
pages
was the
that he's
speaker of the
describing a tree.
trees.
It's
I'll
insane.
have to find. I have a quote from him. I'll have to find you a quote from him where he actually has a quote about why he talks about trees so much. I'll have to
Yeah.
find it.
I liked it better as a movie. I think I did. But I mean, I like The Hobbit. I think I pushed through the rest of like The Lord of the Rings mostly because I wanted to just say that I had read it,
Sure.
which I did, and I did appreciate it, but it was dry. So I mean, aside from that, and I mean, I've read Harry Potter, so I mean, I guess there's some fantasy, but this is like a really high fantasy
Well,
series.
just in general, it doesn't have to be high fantasy. What do you think is required for a good fantasy novel? What do you think are some attributes that are necessary in your? You could even say just for you to like it. What do you think?
I think Sydney said it. Well, I don't know if I'm going to say it exactly how she said it, but you know, there's got to be like the magic has to be good. It can't be like cheesy magic. Like, you know, I think that what I find really interesting about a fantasy series is how they can incorporate magic to like in a physiological sense. Like, for example, this is a good example for in Crescent City.
Right.
This city is very diverse. There are fairies, there are werewolves, there are vampires, there are witches, there are fallen angels. There is a whole mix of different creatures. There's like fire sprites, there's anything you can think of, it's there. There's mermaids.
Right.
And it's insane how big it is, but they all have this like thing called the drop. And if you go through the drop, you're basically immortal, but your body physically has to go through that. And she's decided to make this throughout like well, actually I shouldn't say that. It's not all supernatural characters. Like I know Fae who are like born of that are full because again like this book is like mixed. There's like mixed breeding even. Like humans are even like mixing with like Fae or vampires and stuff like that. And so Bryce Quinlan, she's half human, half Fae. So she's like mortal up to a certain point.
Yeah.
But she's aging, and eventually she does go through the drop, which makes her immortal. And you get to choose, and it's actually like this. It's a very interesting thing, but it's magic in a sense like that. Like it's taking it on a on. I like to listen to. Maybe it's the biologist in me, but I like it when the magic makes sense on a biological level of the of like the fantasy like species.
Right.
That is important to me.
Okay.
I mean, even in Harry Potter, they did that. You know, like only like they had like Muggle borns. They had like wizards. You know, but like even those who were Muggle, like somehow had a certain magical trait, and they were able to go to Hogwarts. You know,
Right.
Like Hermione, both of her parents were Muggles, and she still went to Hogwarts. But there must have been some kind of like magical trait, like speaking, that allowed her to be a witch.
Okay. Definitely interesting. Anything else you want to add to that?
I think
Or is that the main
I think
one?
I think what makes a good fantasy series too is really just a good creative world. Like I know I loved it when Sydney was talking about, shout out to her by the way. Like
we have another Labyrinth fan on the podcast right now today,
yes,
everyone.
yes, Labyrinth is such a good
required
movie.
reading for the Talking's Not Dead podcast.
Yeah. Labyrinth is really good, and that's a great example of honestly like what fantasy should be like. It should be a whole world, more David Bowie in tight pants.
Unfortunately.
But it like that's really good. Like those are good, like even the Neverending Story is a really good one too. Like those are classics.
Yeah. So my last real question I wanted to ask you, it's a two-parter. What do you think, at least in your reading or your opinion, the ultimate message is from the Court of Thorne of Rosen's novel series? What do you think the main message or the main takeaway is?
Man, if I had more time to ponder that question, I could come up with a really, really good answer. But
you can take time to think about it if you want.
No, I would need more than just like a hot minute. I would need to
Okay.
like this is like a day to contemplate because that's a really good question. Um, I think the main takeaway is you are more than your obstacles.
Hmm.
And I think it's really kind of that you are more than your obstacles and um you are stronger than you believe.
Hmm. I like that, and I think that definitely
Those are the
fits
vibes.
with what I read too.
Hmm.
So my second question, same question, but for Crescent City. What do you think the main takeaway is, the main message that you got from your reading of Crescent City?
That one is a lot more harder. But I think it's that you have to put your walls. That's definitely more like you need to like you can also be soft
Mm-hmm.
and sharp. Like
Mm-hmm.
being soft doesn't mean you're weak.
Right.
And it doesn't mean that you can't like let love in and be destroyed by it.
Yeah. That's a good message.
Hmm.
Well, do you have any last minute thoughts or last things you want to add before we end?
Um, read all of the books. Read Sarah J. Maas, please. Like I think like people on TikTok like call it like Moss trash.
I've never heard of that.
I think that's like a saying, but I'm totally here for it. Just become one of us. It's awesome. Read the books.
Third book of
Um,
Crescent City comes out in what, December? January?
January, early January.
Mm-hmm.
I will say I looked this up myself, so if anybody's wondering like what to start with, I've looked it up too. I think the best series to read first is A Court of Thorns and Roses. I didn't do this, but I heard the next book after A Court of Thorns and Roses to read is the Throne of Glass series. So Court of Thorns and Roses, Throne of Glass, then Crescent City.
Yes, and I definitely think that A Court of Thorns and Roses, the first book is definitely a bit of a weird book. Like, it's like, once you get through the first book, then it kind of picks on, like, the series picks up a traction. It's very, the
Yeah.
first book is different from the rest of the series. So if you can get for the first book, the rest of the series picks up.
It does. Cause yeah, I think a lot of people think it's really cheesy, but it's short. It's short.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
relatively.
relatively speaking, you just got to get through it.
Relative to the other
But
books,
once
at
you
least.
do, you're in for a wild ride.
All right. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me.